We don't kill our people. Nobody kill, no government in the world kill its people unless it's led by a crazy person. Fighting terrorism, butchery, that's another issue.
Survival, humanity's most primal instinct. And for so many Syrians, it is that instinct that drives them against all odds to do whatever it takes to live. It is survival amidst the chaos of war. Survival from a regime's system of captivity and mass killings. According to some estimates, over 90,000 individuals have been forcibly disappeared in Syria. Monitoring groups have compiled 60,000 names of those detained by the regime, their fates unknown. I'm Ube Shabander. My team and I traveled across the world to go behind the scenes of a campaign to document and prosecute war criminals involved in the Syria conflict. Between 2011 and 2013, a Syrian military photographer known only as Caesar used a police computer in Damascus to copy thousands of photographs of the bodies of detainees tortured and starved to death in a string of detention facilities around Damascus. Caesar bid his time until his defection, hoping to show the world incontrovertible truth of what was really happening in Bashar al-Assad's jails. It all began in 2011. Civil protests spread throughout the country. The regime gradually escalated its use of violence. Opposition neighborhoods, towns, and villages were decimated. It's refugee camps and tents as far as the eye can see. We're one of the few journalists that are still able to travel into northern Syria, but just a few kilometers away from here, tens of thousands of families are being forced from their homes as the Assad regime and the Russian Air Force continue their incessant bombardment. Over 1,000 have been killed just in the past 3 months alone. Syrian children being pulled from the rubble from their homes. And many of these Syrian families also have loved ones still under the detention of the Assad regime. The destruction and death prompted Caesar to take immeasurable risks in the hopes that the world could bear witness. Fearful for his life, he is now in hiding and spoke to us through a translator.
From day one, at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, when in March of 2011, nonviolent, peaceful protesters were being met with live fire in the streets and the oppression of the state. From that first day, when I noticed that peaceful protesters were being shot by live fire and many were being tortured to death, initially, right away, all I wanted to do was defect. With the beginning of the peaceful uprising, my job became specifically alongside my team to go and take photographs of civilians that have been tortured to death within the regime's intelligence branches. First of all, everybody were innocent civilians. Many of these people had come out calling for their dignity, for their freedom. Others were stopped for no reason at all at random checkpoints. They would be tortured to death in the intelligence branches and then brought to one of 2 military hospitals in Damascus. We would take photographs, see maybe 5, 7, 10 bodies a day that had been tortured or murdered by the Assad regimes. After the first year, and as the years went on, that number on a daily basis significantly increased. I would see or take photographs maybe of 40 or 50 people a day by late 2012 and into 2013. The Assad regime has zero mercy for anyone. One thing that I did notice was that Branch 215 and Intelligence Branch 227 were two that produced maybe the greatest amount of bodies.
Today, the photographs that Caesar smuggled out of Syria are being used in Europe to prosecute top-level Syrian regime officials.
Bashar al-Assad, the evidence is stronger than we've ever had. It's as strong as we had it at Nuremberg. In a sense, looking at the Caesar photos, it's even stronger than we had at the Holocaust. The Caesar evidence, incredibly valuable, is also aided by the fact that groups like CIJA, of which I'm proud to be the chair of the board of, has been successful working with Syrians inside the country to bring out more than 800,000 pages of physical documents from security service, from intelligence, military intelligence, Air Force intelligence headquarters, to build a database of 2 million names, Syrian victims, witnesses, and perpetrators. Documents with Assad's own signature on them from various high-level meetings. We got hundreds of bodies in the freezers, and they're rotting because the freezers aren't running, et cetera. What are we going to do about that? You know, not like, let's stop killing people. And part of that, of course, is that, you know, my passion is justice in these cases and in preventing these crimes by prosecuting those that are responsible.
The Commission for International Justice and Accountability, whose core work is to collect evidence of genocide and crimes against humanity, works closely with Ambassador Rapp on Syria war crimes documentation.
It's very strong. It's not only objectively in its own right more powerful than we've seen before. So what we're able to do is to put together all of that really good documentation about the criminality involved and tie it to this very powerful documentation on who was responsible.
From an undisclosed location in Europe, Chris and his team have been working with local law enforcement agencies, connecting the dots and drawing a direct line of culpability.
Once you look at the totality of this evidence, it is absolutely clear that all of those involved at the highest level not only knew what was going on, but were encouraging it. With the proper evidence, there will be an objective demonstration of their culpability in these crimes. Documentation, it demonstrates a very similar process from what we saw from the Nazis. The key to the Caesar photos is it puts a clear picture of the criminality. Right? That criminality is what's driving this entire process. Anytime that we have the opportunity to demonstrate to everyone that is watching that those who are responsible for crimes will not get away with it. In the absence of any international court or tribunal, the only place to find justice, the only place where we could meet our desired end of providing this evidence to law enforcement and to prosecutorial authorities is through domestic prosecutorial services. And that's what we've done.
Pushing for additional action against the regime, Syrian-American activist Muaz Mustafa arranged for Caesar to come to Washington and testify to Congress. Lawmakers have now passed the Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act that will financially punish Bashar al-Assad and his regime for committing war crimes against the Syrian population.
I recently met with the brave defector known to the world as Caesar, for whom this bill is named. His story is gut-wrenching. He told me about the shocking scale of torture and murder being carried out within the prisons of Syria. The photographic evidence he smuggled out and showed to us proves beyond any doubt the brutality of Bashar al-Assad.
That gives me a lot of hope that we will reach justice, and we're simply not going to give up until we do so. I wanted to make sure that as many people as possible saw what happens in prison. So there's 30 select photographs from the Caesar file that we've taken to the U.S. Congress. They've been on display at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, where there is an existing Caesar exhibit and Syria exhibit there. It is genocidal massacres and a machinery of death. We've been able to accomplish and work with law firms and prosecutors in Spain, Sweden, Germany, and France with the Caesar photos and Caesar's testimony as key evidence. Syrian activists say that the accountability campaign against the regime gives them a measure of hope.
Sarah Hunaidi was one of thousands of young Syrians who took to the streets in 2011, protesting against the regime.
In Syria, we used to say that walls have ears. Like, we can't even trust to be ourselves in our own homes, especially like with our relatives, with our neighbors, because they might write us up and we might disappear forever. In Assad dungeons, of course. But it really means a lot for us to know that there are people who are working on justice and accountability. They torture you. Like, my friends told me a lot of stories, horrible stories, just as similar as someone from Damascus or Homs who has been tortured.
What did they tell you?
Well, the techniques of torture, the chair, the shabah, they are like the numbers of people in one small room, the insects that grew out of people, the rape of both women and men. A lot of stories that I lived with. I've seen so many bodies of friends and of people who they still have the marks now, like years after they left prison. So the evidence, we don't have a problem with evidence. We have a lot of evidence. It's just about if we're gonna do something about it, if we're gonna actually hold that regime accountable, because they shouldn't get away with this. Then I remember when we were all waiting for his first speech, where he brought up the word terrorists, and we laughed. I remember we looked at my friends and like, terrorists? What the hell is he talking about?
Assad's right-hand men, regime figures like Director of General Intelligence Ali Mamlouk and the head of the feared Air Force Intelligence Branch, Jamil Hassan, are high atop the list of wanted war criminals. They have been with Assad from the beginning, allegedly designing the campaign to exterminate all those who stood in his way. The Syria Justice and Accountability Center has been able to capture thousands of pages of classified documents from these intelligence services, including military orders given by senior regime figures. Muhammad Abdullah, a dissident and director of the center, wants to make sure that the world never forgets.
They wrote everything. And similarly, if you look, and this is a pattern of the violations always, and the practice of totalitarian governments, if you want, how Caesar photos were documented. Like, you number every dead body, you take several shots of every one of them before you dump the dead body in a plastic bag and dump it in a mass grave. So the bureaucracy of death, what Human Rights Watch called what's happening in the Caesar file, is exactly what happens here in the documents.
The full scope of this bureaucracy of death is staggering. Assad regime intelligence files leaked in 2018 to an opposition media outlet showed that over 1 million names were wanted by the Syrian regime. In those files was my own arrest notice, issued by Syrian military intelligence.
General Fuad Al-Tawil, the deputy chief of the Air Force Intelligence, is named all along the documents. He signed and ordered in very high-level orders. And that's what basically is astonishing. A short line from the intelligence saying, terrorists are gathering in this hospital, we propose we shell the hospital. And he writes one word, agreed. There's some signed by the National Security Advisor, basically the head of the National Security Bureau. And all these, if you look at it, and these documents from different branches, all goes up to the same area, the national security. This tells, again, these were not isolated violations as the Syrian government tried to justify at the beginning. And these are enough evidence of who was involved, who decided, who ordered, and who implemented these campaigns. If we don't do this work, Assad might get away with what he's done. And also, he's going to teach Syrian children that a terrorist group came and attacked Syria and Assad defended it and we ended up with that. No, here's the truth, here's the history, and here's the future of Syria on these documentation.
In 2019, Muhammad received the Anne Frank Special Recognition Award for his work. With him was 99-year-old Benjamin Ferencz, also recognized for his work as a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. 6 decades apart, their common dedication to pursuing justice for war crimes found them on the same stage.
Plead to this indictment, guilty or not guilty. Nicht schuldig.
Many of the survivors of Assad's prisons have ended up here in southern Turkey, along the border with Syria. Hanadi was imprisoned for 3 years in the special detention facility for women.
حياتي قبل الثورة يعني حياة طبيعية جدا، يعني هدوء كان، ما كان عندنا يعني ما كان في رؤى سياسية، ما في تطلعات سياسية مثل هلا، كانت كتير حلوة يعني. ب 2011 كان الشهر الخامس أنا بتذكر بالضبط، هون اشتد الوتير عفوا. هذا اليوم بتذكره كتير منيح، كانوا كتير خايفين، كنا كتير خايفين شو بده يصير فينا. أنا ناشطة كنت بضمن بهالتجمع، كان النظام يعني بجن جنونه على هالكلمة إنه ناشط، هي كانت أكبر تهمة بوقتها، يعني كانت هي التهمة أصعب من السلاح، يعني كتير نساء بالمئات إجوا على سجن عذراء أنا بتواجدي، اتهمهم ربطة خبز، وانتقل من فرع لفرع لغاية ما وصلت ل 215. الصبايا اللي ما بنساها أبداً، لأنه شخص كتير كان يعني حدا أثر فيني جداً وأثر على كل الموجودين معها، يعني هيك حدا كتير كان إنسان جميل جداً، يعني كانت كتير حلوة ومرحة وطموحة جداً. كانت اسمها رحاب العلاوي، تدرس بالجامعة، كانت سنة ثالثة بالهندسة.
Rehab was the only female identified in Caesar's photographs.
احنا كنا نموت ألف موتة، صرت أبكي بشكل هستيري وبصريخ، ورجعت إنه كأنه أول لحظة اعتقلت. فأهلي شافوا هاي الحالة انصدموا، قلت لهم أنتوا ما بتعرفوا شو عملوا فينا، أنتوا بحياتكم ما حتعرفوا. بيجي بالليل، ونحن معروف عنا بالليل المعتقلين ما بيطلعوا برا البيت، عفوا برا المعتقل، إلا في حالة واحدة هو الإعدام. فقالوا لي إنه هي عرفت من عيونه إنه هي رايحة على موتها. والله العدالة هي السلاح الوحيد اللي بقي بإيدينا، لأنه في كتير نساء أخذوها على سيدنايا، ناس بتقول ما في حقائق، إن شاء الله بيطلع قيصر تاني.
Sidnaya is a regime-run military prison near Damascus. Amnesty International estimated that between 5,000 and 13,000 people were extrajudicially executed at Sidnaya between September 2011 and December 2015. Omar al-Shugra was one of the lucky few to make it out alive after being transferred there from Branch 215.
I was arrested in 7 different times by different military intelligence branches and the Air Force and the state security. I've been arrested by different kinds, but the longest period in prison, I was detained by the military intelligence service in Syria, and this time was 3 years, between 17 and 20 years old. But the last time, they killed my dad, and they killed my siblings, so nobody could come inside prison and get me outside of prison. So I stayed there for 3 years. That's how I was living my life in prison, like everybody died.
Omar's detention would intersect with the time that Caesar was photographing the bodies. In some instances, the numbers on the bodies that Caesar was photographing were forcibly written by Omar.
In branch 215, the guard, I get task from the guard to write the numbers in the dead bodies. You take this body to the dead room, isolation room we call it there, and we collect all the dead bodies there, and in the morning a car come and take these dead bodies. And they came to my mom after just 6 months in prison. They came to my mom and said, your son died in prison and he was a terrorist. Why I'm here? These questions surprise you a lot. Like the first question, how many officers have you killed? Give me any number, but not 0. What? 15 years old? I never had a knife in my hands. The day after they came again, and I asked, anybody else speak English? One other person asked, because some people think that person who spoke English being released or something. They didn't see him in the isolation room. I was working there. I saw him dead in the isolation room. They take the second person to the 6th floor. This person the day after in the isolation room dead. I write the number. Then I started and every day they did that for a long time. And every person who spoke a little bit of English was sent to the isolation room because they were translators working there in the 6th floor where you have international prisoners.
Omar's detainment took a heavy physical and mental toll. He was released after his mother paid a $20,000 bribe. Smuggled into Turkey, he eventually found his way to Sweden.
Open my eyes, get so much pain because it was the first time I see the sun, I see light. First time see the sky, color, blue, yellow. I wasn't thinking about like I'm still alive. I think like I died and now it's my afterlife, looking at everything is amazing, until I saw my body. And I just had torture marks everywhere and blood, and I had maggots eating in my body, and I said like, I'm still alive for a reason.
Bound by fateful circumstances with Caesar, Omar now speaks publicly around the world about the need for justice and accountability in Syria.
That's why I will always, as long as I'm still alive, I'm gonna fight to bring these people to justice, to court, or maybe put them behind the bars. These people can't be free as they are. They are monsters, they killing, they have no feelings. The guard in prison was laughing with a so big smile and laugh at, you hear it. You feel he is enjoying that torture.
Unbeknownst to Omar as he languished in prison, the release of Caesar's photos in 2014 prompted an internal debate in Washington. Wael al-Zayat was a State Department diplomat heavily involved in the Obama administration's Syria policy.
I was one of two U.S. officials who first saw those images, and it was in Turkey when they were smuggled out of Syria through Jordan to Turkey. I was shocked. The images that I saw to me looked like the Holocaust. They really did. They were indistinguishable from images we all have come to know all too well of those emaciated, tortured, dead bodies piled on top of one another.
Were you disappointed that Obama didn't do more at the time?
Absolutely. Many of us were disappointed. I think that there are times where the right thing to do is incumbent upon us to call a spade by all measures. The Syrian regime led by Bashar al-Assad is a war criminal regime.
Jasmine Al-Gamal, a former Pentagon advisor for the Obama administration, was also at the center of the Syria policy debate. She is now working on refugee issues in the region.
There hasn't been really any voice that has said, no, this is wrong, and we are going to actually do something about it because we know that this is happening. And so I think what's behind it is just simply a person who knows that he can get away with the lie. Look at what's happening in Idlib today. 1.5 million children being bombed with no apparent feeling or remorse or guilt. I like to believe that evil doesn't prevail in the end.
According to media reports, the Obama administration actively discouraged Congress from passing the Caesar Protection Act in 2016, fearing that the bill would interfere in sensitive diplomacy.
Aside from specific diplomats, whether it's Ambassador Stephen Rapp or a few others that saw how horrible what's happening there and wanted to truly help, the overall administration of President Obama did very little.
Was there a sense in the Obama administration that pursuing justice and accountability would distract from engagement with the Russians and with the Iranians when it came to Syria?
I think that's a fair way to put it.
But Syrians haven't given up just yet. They are still calling for the release of the detainees, even in the areas around the capital Damascus that the regime recently wrested from opposition control.
والله ما بتتصدق النظام السوري اللي عمل في بالمعتقلات شيء ما بيتصدق ابدا بس لا صدقوا النظام مجرم مجرم مجرم.
The ultimate victory for us is that evidence is presented in courts and it is a significant part of successful prosecution.
I know that the Assad regime, that each one of these intelligence branches continues to use these horrific types of torture.
President in Syria gonna be in court one day, and I believe that I'm gonna be standing in front of him, asking him questions. Everybody has a responsibility to do something, because today it's in my country, tomorrow it's in yours. You have to care about people so people can care about you in the future. And don't say, oh, I feel bad for these people. Don't feel bad. Do good. Do something.
Never again. The systemic mass slaughter of human beings by a government was supposed to be a relic of the past, but tragically for so many Syrians, it became a repeat of it. And here in the US Holocaust Museum, the images and stories of the atrocities committed by the Assad regime are forever memorialized. And as you walk into the Syrian exhibit, you see a quote from the museum's founder. It reads, "Our remembering aims at saving as many men and women as possible from apathy to evil."